Thank you for the opportunity to present here, and I will go ahead to my disclosure, which is like one time, literally, I did each of these things, but to be open about it, I'm telling you, it has nothing to do with my talk today. Okay, so we are going to talk a little bit about feedback, and then I'll get to grit and resilience and all that a little bit later in the talk. So before I get into the substance of my talk, I want you all to think about a time when you either received feedback that was offensive or hurtful to you, or that you gave feedback that may have been perceived by the recipient as either offensive or hurtful. Because I think that will be helpful as we talk through how things might be better on both ends, to think about the things that went wrong in your own particular situations. In full disclosure, I have been on both sides of that myself more than once. So I wanted to go back to a classic paper. If you guys haven't read it and have any interest in feedback, you should check it out, by Jack Endy from 1983 on what feedback is. And what he says is that feedback is informed, it's non-evaluative, so it's not judgment. It's an objective appraisal of performance that's intended to improve clinical skills, right? So it's important for us to remember why we're giving feedback, or for the recipient to understand why they're getting the feedback. The goal is for us all to improve. And yet, people may ostensibly want information about their performance, but really only insofar as as it confirms their own self-concept. So I think that probably resonates with people here, either for yourselves or learners you've worked with. And that's the challenge. If you are in a position, let me just ask real quick, how many people in here are trainees? So we have some trainees, and other people are in evaluative positions probably. There's that tension there. Whoever's doing the evaluating, even if it's, or giving the feedback, even if you're a trainee, you're probably giving feedback to other people. So just remember the tension here as we keep going through. There are characteristics of effective feedback. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because this is pretty well put out there in the literature over 20, 30 years, but just a quick summary, which is one, that whoever is giving the feedback and receiving the feedback have to both be approaching it as though we have a common goal. We're both trying to get to a place of better performance. And it's not about blame or shame or anything like that. The feedback needs to be timely, right? We've all trained in our system here where you got some feedback that said something very vague about your performance 3 months ago. That's not going to change performance, and it's not going to help us get to the goal of improving performance. Feedback ideally ought to be based on firsthand information, right? We have all probably been in the position where someone said to us, well, the people on XYZ rotation felt that you underperformed in this way. And you go, okay, like, can you tell me more? And the person says, no, I wasn't there, I don't know. And so what's a person supposed to do with that? It's very helpful if that feedback can be firsthand. It should be about specific remediable aspects of the performance. So feedback that says you are difficult is not feedback, right? How's that person supposed to behave differently? What about that person was difficult? Were there instances in which this person was perceived to be difficult? That's a different conversation. So it should not be about the person, but about the performance. And it's important to not assume things about people, right? Anybody who's read Difficult Conversations, which is a good book, I've read it, you know that one of the key pitfalls is assuming that you know why something happened or didn't happen. That the person said this because he or she was feeling this. But we really have no idea, right? I have no idea what's in anybody's mind right now, what people are surfing on their computers, no idea. So it's important for me to not assume that about anybody, and it's important for both receivers and givers of feedback to keep that in mind. In addition, we want to make sure that we're linking behavior to outcomes, not just I'd like you to smile more because I'd like you to smile more. I've gotten that too. But I'd like you to smile more because the patients feel more comfortable or something, some outcome that you're going to try to link the feedback to. So what are some obstacles to giving feedback? Logistics, right? Often we're busy clinical surgeons. We are doing a case, then going to talk to the family, then pre-oping the next patient, then going to do a case. And somewhere in there, as the independent practitioner, I'm interacting with trainees, and I may notice things that I want to give feedback about, but just don't have time to. And then I try to figure out, well, when can I sit down with this person, and what's their schedule look like? So all of that stuff can be challenging. And we're worried about the disappointment that the person might feel if we give them perhaps constructive feedback, and the shame and the guilt that that person may feel, even if we don't intend that at all. Even if we come into the whole thing not assuming anything as the giver of the feedback, if we don't assume anything about the person and we're talking about specific remediable performance, not aspects of the person's being, it still isn't always heard that way. And then I just put the number 2000 on there because I think people have this idea that millennials are like different and weird and who knows how to talk to them. I just think that they're mostly like everyone else, except they're a little bit less tolerant of bullshit. So they don't want to just be told to smile more. They want to know why. And they want things to be efficient, and I think that's very reasonable. Obstacles to receiving feedback. So these are all things we've probably experienced as well. One is the ego. So every single human has a very basic drive to protect their sense of self. And it's not selfish, it's just natural. Everyone has that. And when we go to receive feedback, we're constantly trying to make sure that we protect our own identity, because if we fall apart, then no matter what the feedback is, we're not going to be able to act on it, right? And so it depends how the person who's giving the feedback comes into it too, obviously. But the receiver is always trying to figure out, how do I reconcile the information that's being given to me with my idea of who I am and who I want to be? Emotional responses, right? So anger is one of them, but also sadness or hurt or shame, all of that on the side of the receiver can prevent that person from hearing the feedback, which then prevents them from being able to learn and do better next time. And there can be big differences between a learner's self-assessment and the assessment of the person who is providing them feedback. And that's a huge challenge too, because what we'll see is, on the next slide I'll tell you, but hold on to that thought. This was actually another paper that's really good to read on Being You is the first author, and it was in JAMA in like 2010, but talking about the learners, the role of learners in feedback. And what they said was consideration should be given to desensitizing learners to negative feedback to lessen the affective response. So again, keeping in mind that the more emotional the situation is, the less that person's going to really learn and the less effective the feedback is going to be. So this is the heart of that problem, which is if you're going to tell me that I'm an awful human being, which again is not feedback, but if someone were to say that to me, my immediate reaction is going to be to shut down and think about ways and reasons that I don't want to believe that feedback because it's extremely threatening to me. So I may say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I might not say that to the person, but in my head, who is this person? What a jerk. He's not a role model anyway. I'm going to ignore that. Or, no, I don't think that's relevant to the situation, right? Which I would do. If someone tells me I need to smile more, that's probably my response is, okay, thanks. Or if the person just has a different style, right? Their approach to life seems to be different from yours. You go, well, I get it. You know, maybe you didn't want to have kids, but I want to have kids and we're just different. Or you have some story in your mind about why that piece of advice is no longer relevant. Well, that happened 3 months ago, and I've really changed since then, or I'm not in that situation, or I never will be in that situation. So there's all these ways that we tell ourselves stories to be able to protect ourselves from what we see sometimes as an affront. And that's what happens when we don't, as the person who's giving the feedback, do what we can to give the feedback in private, make it specific, and make it about a performance rather than having it be about who the person is. And so what is the role of some of these other terms like grit and self-efficacy, growth mindset, resilience, and how people receive feedback? You know, there's not a ton out there on that topic, but just I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this, or a minute. I have only a minute left. Two? Okay, two. So grit, for people who don't know, is perseverance and passion for long-term goals. One could hypothesize that people who have more grit may be more resilient, but there's actually not data on that I'm aware of. With regard to self-efficacy, it is basically a measure of a person's perception of their own capability to be able to do a particular task. And there is general self-efficacy, how confident do I feel in my personal ability to get things done, versus there can be specific self-efficacy. So self-efficacy about eating, for example, how confident am I in my ability to eat healthily. And so there's some data that suggests that when destructive feedback is given, so feedback that tears people down, that their self-efficacy is affected. And we also have data that shows that self-efficacy is associated with well-being. And the growth mindset, I'll just say briefly, the basic idea is that if you have a fixed mindset, you think that people are born with certain abilities and talents, and they're fixed. They're not things that can change. Whereas if you have a malleable mindset, you think, I may not be good at this task now, or I may not be good at math now, but I can learn and be better. And it turns out that people who have a more malleable mindset are healthier and are better able to learn in school context. So you can imagine that someone with a more malleable mindset might be better able to incorporate feedback, especially negative feedback. So I want to leave you with this, which is what I think is a decent model for adult learners, which is something called WISE feedback. So this is based on a study that was done with school students, high school and middle school students. But basically what they did was they graded essays, and they told people either, here are the things you need to do better, and we're giving you feedback because we want you to get feedback. Honestly, it was like that simple a message, versus here are all the things you can do better, and we're giving you this feedback because we believe that you can do better. And that's what's the wise part of it, because having a high standard alone can make the learner just feel bad. And then you have that emotional response, and they're not necessarily engaging with the information about what was bad and how they could do differently. But if you say, here are the ways you could do better, and I'm just telling you because I know that you can do it, then people seem to respond to that better. And I could tell you more about that study if anybody's interested, but the real difference in performance was only seen when they got both of those messages. So just giving people feedback on their essays alone didn't seem to change their performance. And that's it.